Now, wage loss claims are an important piece of Part E of the EEOICPA program. And the way wage loss works is they look at the amount that the worker was making prior to the diagnosis of his or her accepted condition. They compare that, the Department of Labor claims examiner compares that amount to the amount that the worker earned in subsequent years. And to the extent that the amount is less than 75% of the amount that the worker earned prior to diagnosis of his or her condition, or the time when the condition caused the worker to lose wages. So it's the date of first wage loss that is the important date. But the measurement is prior year's earnings with that year's earnings. If the earnings are less than 75% of what the worker earned prior to his or her first wage loss associated with the accepted claim, that worker receives $10,000 for that year of wage loss. So the wage loss compensation does not fully compensate the worker for the wages that were lost. It is more of a replacement income, and the total, if the amount is 75% less than the pre-wage loss year, then the worker receives $10,000. If the total amount of the wage loss is more than 50%, in other words, the worker's wages are less than 50% of the year prior, then the total wage loss for that year is $15,000. So the way these calculations are performed is the Department of Labor obtains records from the Social Security Administration, earnings records, and those earnings records are prepared based on quarterly reporting, I believe, and so they look at the last 3 years of earnings prior to the first wage loss. And so 12 quarters of wages are then divided by 12, and then in turn divided by 3 in order to come up with a monthly wage and then an annual wage multiplied by, I think they come up with a monthly wage and then they multiply it by 12 to obtain an average annual wage. And this average annual wage is compared to the annual wage that the worker earned after his or her first period of wage loss. And if the worker earned 75% of what he or she earned prior to first wage loss based on the accepted condition, the compensation is $10,000 for that year. If the worker's wage was less than 50% of what he earned prior to first wage loss based on the accepted condition, the amount would be $15,000 for that year. So very often what we run into is a worker will work until he or she can no longer work anymore, and then will retire and work and not work at all subsequent to the first year of wage loss. And so then sometimes the first year of wage loss is less than 75%, but more than 50%, and therefore the worker will receive $10,000 in compensation, and then thereafter, each year would be no income, and then that would be $15,000 per year. Now, this wage loss you're only paid annual wage loss for years prior to your Social Security retirement age. So in the early years, the retirement age was 65. But subsequent to that, the retirement age is a moving target, and the Department of Labor calculates the appropriate retirement age based on information from from Social Security Administration. But certain workers retire at 67 now, but it's your Social Security retirement age. And that age is the same whether or not you've decided to receive early Social Security, such that you started receiving Social Security at 62 or some other age. The relevant age is the Social Security retirement age. So a worker who stops working at 60 after being diagnosed with lung cancer, and the lung cancer prevents him or her from working after 60, after he or she reaches 60 years old, would then become eligible for wage loss from 60 to 65, or maybe from 60 to 67, depending on that worker's Social Security retirement age. So that tells us a little bit about wage loss under the EEOICPA program. Wage loss applies to all uranium miner workers whose claims are accepted under the program, to all uranium mill workers whose claims are accepted under the program, and to all uranium ore transporters whose claims are accepted under the program. Wage loss also applies to nuclear weapons manufacturing industry workers under the EEOICPA.